You're just being difficult, Mom. That's what my son Greg said to me. No raised voice, no anger, just flat. Like I was the one causing problems for no reason. I had just mentioned, calmly, that I couldn't keep babysitting the kids every single day. My back had started acting up again. Real pain, deep in the lower part, like something was pulling from the inside. I'd been sleeping on a futon for over 2 years. My knees ached every morning. And still, every weekday, I was up by 6 to make lunches, pack bags, and take care of 2 kids under the age of 6 while their parents worked full-time. I'm not trying to be difficult, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I just can't physically do it every day anymore. Greg didn't look up from his phone. We all have stuff going on, Mom. It landed in my chest like a rock. He walked off like I'd asked him to cancel a vacation. And just like that, the conversation was over. I stood in the kitchen, holding the same sponge I'd used to wipe the counter every day for 3 years. The house was quiet now. Callie was upstairs putting the kids to bed. Greg was back on his laptop, probably answering emails from the office or watching highlights from some game. I stood there with my back throbbing and thought, did I really sign up for this? When I moved in, it wasn't supposed to be like this. Just a few months. That was the plan. Help them adjust to the baby. Callie was heading back to work after her maternity leave, and Greg said it would be a blessing to have me around. You'll get to be close to your grandkids, he said. It's just temporary, Mom. I believed him. I gave up my apartment. It was nothing fancy, just a second-floor unit above a bakery in Boise. But it was mine. Sunlight in the mornings, quiet evenings, a small balcony with room for a chair and 2 flower pots. I had my book club on Thursdays, the volunteer shifts at the church thrift store, and my own doctor close by. When I moved in with Greg and Callie, I didn't even bring much. Just 2 suitcases, my knitting bag, and a box of books. I figured I wouldn't need more than that. My real things, old photos, my sewing machine, Robert's letters, I left in the garage. Callie said she'd help me unpack them later. That was 3 years ago. Now I sleep in what used to be their home gym. They pulled out the treadmill and moved in a futon. It's just for a little while, Callie had said. We'll figure something more permanent soon. There are no windows down there. It gets damp in the winter, hot in the summer, and smells like storage. They plugged in a dehumidifier last year when I said I couldn't sleep from the mustiness. The noise from it keeps me up anyway. I don't complain. At least, I hadn't. But lately, everything just hurts. I haven't been to my chiropractor in 6 months. I canceled 2 appointments because one of the kids had a dentist thing, and the other time, Callie had a meeting that ran late. I told myself it was fine. They were busy. I could reschedule, but I never did. I can't remember the last time I walked around the block without holding onto the railing. My left leg goes numb if I stand too long, but every morning I push through. I get the breakfast going, pack the lunches, and get both kids ready while Greg and Callie head off to work like I'm just another part of the household machinery. When I first started helping out, it felt good to be needed. I told myself it was love. I watched the baby learn to sit up, to crawl, to walk. I was there for every step. I didn't miss a single preschool pickup. But somewhere along the line, it stopped being help. It became expectation. No thank yous. No checking in. Just, can you take them to the library today? Or Callie's got yoga tonight. Can you do dinner and bath? Like I was the hired help. Except no one's paying me. Not even with kindness. So when I finally said, I need a break, Greg acted like I'd pulled the rug from under him. You're just being difficult, Mom. That's what stayed in my head all night. Not, are you okay? Not, can we figure something out? Just, you're being difficult. I didn't sleep that night. My back pulsed like a low drumbeat under my skin. I tried to shift on the futon, but the springs dug into my side. I stared at the ceiling, at the single bulb they'd strung up on a hook to give me more light. The next morning, I made the kids cereal and laid out their clothes like always. Callie came downstairs, sipping coffee, scrolling her phone. She didn't say good morning, just asked if I could pick up dry cleaning after taking the youngest to story time. I nodded, but inside, I felt something slide out of place, like a drawer that had been forced shut too many times finally coming unhinged. Later that afternoon, I wrote something in my notebook for the first time in months. If I'm being difficult for not breaking my back every day, maybe I've been too easy for too long. I underlined it twice. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew I couldn't keep doing this. Not like this. Not anymore. I used to live above a bakery in downtown Boise. Nothing fancy. The stairs creaked, the paint peeled in places, and the window screens didn't always stay in place. But I loved it. Every morning, the smell of fresh bread and cinnamon rolls would drift through my window. I had a little round table by the front window where I drank my tea and read the newspaper. Sundays, I'd call my sister Jeanette while folding laundry or watering the geraniums on my small balcony. She'd fill me in on the neighbors, her bad knees, and whatever new coupon trick she was trying that week. I had a routine. Mondays and Wednesdays, I volunteered at the thrift shop a few blocks away. I knew all the regulars. I liked helping the new moms find clothes for their kids, or the older folks hunting for a good pan. Every Thursday, I stopped by the library, and every Saturday I met a group of women for lunch at the community center. We didn't have much in common except age and sore joints, but we laughed a lot. It felt good. I had a quiet, full life. Then Greg called. I still remember the exact words. We could really use the help, Mom. And think of the time with the kids. He was so sure, so casual, like I had nothing more important going on. I remember hesitating for just a second. Then he added, "It'll just be for a few months, just until we adjust." I packed up everything in 3 days. I gave up my lease and put what I couldn't carry into a storage unit. The landlord was kind, said he'd miss me. I cried a little when I handed him the keys, but I told myself I was doing the right thing, helping my son, helping family. That's what mothers do, right? I moved in with Greg and Callie the following week. Callie had already started setting things up. She showed me the spare room and said she'd clean out a drawer for my things. She called it temporary, too, but with a tone that already felt permanent. The first few weeks, I stayed in that upstairs guest room. It had a small window, soft carpet, and a twin bed with a blue quilt. It wasn't home, but it was quiet. I didn't unpack much, just enough to get by. I figured I'd be back to my place by the end of the year. Then Callie said she needed the room for her new home office. Said the basement would be more private for me anyway. "You'll have your own space," she told me. "We'll make it cozy." That was the word she used. Cozy. They moved me downstairs. The futon was already set up. There was a small dresser, a lamp, and a folding table against the wall. I thanked them, smiled, and went back upstairs to help with dinner. I didn't say anything about the chill in the room or the fact that I had to duck slightly near the pipes. I told myself I could adjust. That's how it always starts. I can adjust. I stopped volunteering. The thrift store was too far to walk, and I didn't have a car anymore. I gave it back to Greg when his second baby was born. He said they needed a second vehicle now that both of them were working. "You don't really drive much anymore, right?" he asked. I nodded. It was easier than explaining. I stopped calling Jeanette as often. I didn't want to complain, and I didn't have much new to say. It was hard to talk about my day when every hour was about someone else's. My days became routine again, but not in the way they used to be. I got the kids ready in the morning. I packed Callie's lunch. I sorted laundry, picked up toys, scrubbed the bathroom, and started dinner by 4. I'd wait for Greg and Callie to get home, then disappear into the basement while they watched shows upstairs. Sometimes one of the kids would come down for a minute, but not often. Nobody asked how I was. Nobody asked if I wanted to go anywhere, or if I was lonely, or if I needed time to rest. They didn't mean to be unkind. I think they were just busy, focused on the next task, the next deadline, the next kid's appointment. Callie stopped asking. She started telling. Can you pick up paper towels? Don't forget story time at the library. We're going to be late. Can you finish dinner? No, please. No, thank you. Just expectations. And Greg, he rushed through everything. If he wasn't on his phone, he was halfway out the door. Some days he'd give me a half hug and say, "Thanks, Mom," but his eyes were already somewhere else. I became part of the routine, a fixture in the background. It's a strange thing realizing you vanished in a house full of people. I wasn't living. I was orbiting around their lives. One afternoon, I found an old photo of myself tucked in one of my cookbooks. It was taken at a potluck years ago, back when I still had color in my hair and a calendar full of things I looked forward to. I stared at it for a long time, not because I missed how I looked, but because I missed how I felt, like I had purpose, like I was allowed to exist just for me. Now, I was always tired. My joints ached. My shoulders were tight from bending and lifting and stretching just to meet other people's needs. But no one noticed. And if they did, they never said. And then Greg told me I was just being difficult. Not tired, not hurting, just difficult. That's when I started thinking about the life I'd left behind and wondering why I gave it up so easily. It was a Tuesday. I remember because the kids had early release from school, and the house always felt louder on those days. I had just finished wiping down the counters and was loading the last few dishes into the washer. Nothing heavy, just plates and a few mugs. I bent down to grab one from the bottom of the sink, and something shifted in my lower back. At first, it was just pressure, then a sharp pain, like someone stuck a knife in the base of my spine and twisted it. My hands trembled. The plate slipped from my fingers and crashed to the floor. The sound made me jump. I grabbed the counter to steady myself. My knees buckled slightly, but I didn't fall. I stood there, leaning forward, holding onto the edge like it was the only thing keeping me upright. The pieces of the plate were scattered at my feet, sharp edges glinting in the kitchen light. Callie came in from the hallway. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't even look at me for more than a second. "Seriously," she said, "that was one of the good ones." I was still holding onto the counter, trying to catch my breath. My leg had gone numb from the hip down. "I think my back," I started, but she cut me off. "We really can't afford you to break down on us now," she said, just like that, like I was a worn-out appliance. Then she sighed, stepped over the broken plate, and called out to one of the kids upstairs. "Leona, grab your socks. We're going to be late." I didn't move. I couldn't, not right away. When the pain eased just enough, I picked up the pieces slowly and dumped them in the trash. My hands shook. I put the broom back in the corner and turned off the dishwasher, even though it wasn't full. Then I went downstairs. That night, I lay on the futon with a frozen bag of peas under my lower back. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to hear Callie say I was being dramatic or Greg ask if I'd taken anything for it, like that was a cure-all. I didn't want the size or the thin patience. So I said nothing. The next morning, I got up early, same as always. Made toast, sliced bananas, packed lunches. The whole time, my back felt like it was one wrong move from locking up again. I took some over-the-counter pain meds I kept hidden in my purse. That was day 1. The second night, I barely slept. The kids had tracked dirt through the living room, and I bent down to sweep it before Callie came back. When I straightened up, the pain shot down my legs so hard I had to hold the wall just to walk back to the basement. I put a heating pad on low and sat there in silence. Around 10, I heard Greg in the kitchen talking on the phone. I wasn't trying to listen. His voice just carried down the vents when the house was quiet. "Yeah, she's still here," he said. "Basically part of the furniture now." He laughed a little. Not loud, but enough. I sat on the edge of the futon, staring at the lamp across the room. I kept repeating that line in my head. Part of the furniture. If you've ever given your whole heart to family and ended up feeling invisible, hit the like button right now. Somebody needs to know we don't just disappear when we get older. Not his mother. Not someone who gave up her life to help. Just part of the setup. I thought back to when he was 10 and broke his ankle. I carried him up the stairs every night for a month. When he had the flu, I sat next to his bed with cold towels on his forehead and ran to the store twice in the same night for crackers and Gatorade. I stayed up with him when he had nightmares and whispered stories to calm him down. I thought all that mattered. I thought it built something that would last. Now, I was just a chair with opinions. The next day, my leg went numb again while folding towels. I dropped one and had to slide it with my foot across the floor because bending wasn't an option. I sat down and took a deep breath. I looked around the room and realized I didn't belong to any of it. Not the toys I picked up a dozen times a day. Not the cabinets I stocked and organized. Not even the bed I slept in. The futon had been Callie's brother's before she gave it to me, and it still had a faint stain on one corner she never got out. Everything I touched belonged to someone else. I had no space in that house that was mine, just a corner to rest in, a few drawers, a couple hooks, and a schedule no one asked me about, but everyone expected me to follow. Greg came home late that night. He walked into the kitchen, dropped his bag, and didn't notice I was still cleaning up from dinner. I had one hand pressed against my back as I rinsed the last of the dishes. "Dinner good?" I asked, careful not to sound tired. He glanced up from his phone and said, "Yeah, thanks." Then he left the room. That was it. I stood there, staring at the faucet. For a moment, I didn't feel anything at all. Not sadness, not anger, just this blank space, like my mind went quiet to make room for a thought I hadn't had yet. Then it came. If my body is screaming and my son doesn't see it, maybe it's not my back that's the problem. Maybe it's this life I'm trapped in. 3 nights later, I sat with my notebook again. They don't see what's broken until it's gone. But by then it's not mine to fix. That night, I didn't ice my back. I didn't take pain meds. I just laid flat and stared at the ceiling and wondered what it would take to leave. Not because I wanted to hurt them, but because I finally understood something. They weren't going to change. So maybe I had to. I was looking for wrapping paper. It was my granddaughter Leona's birthday the next day, and I bought her a small puzzle from the dollar store. I didn't want her to feel like I forgot. So I went into the hallway closet to see if there was anything I could use to wrap it. That's when I saw it. My things shoved on the top shelf, wedged between a pair of Callie's winter boots and an old lamp. My favorite blue sweater was balled up in the corner. It smelled like detergent and dust. I reached up to grab it, but the hanger snagged on something, and half the stack tumbled down. I bent slowly, careful with my back, and started picking up old scarves, a small bag of yarn, and the tote I used to bring to the farmer's market on Saturdays. Everything felt stiff, cold, like it hadn't been touched in years. I used to wear that sweater every fall. I'd walk down to the bakery in it, pick up a cinnamon roll and a cup of coffee, and sit on my little balcony. It had a tiny hole in the left sleeve, but I never fixed it. I kind of liked it that way. Now, it was crammed in a closet like it didn't matter. Like I didn't matter. I stood there for a while, holding the sweater against my chest. Then I carefully folded it, placed it back on the shelf, and closed the closet door. Later that afternoon, while the kids were watching a cartoon and Callie was out running errands, I walked out to the garage. The boxes were still there, the same ones I packed from my apartment 3 years ago, stacked against the wall, half covered by sports gear and old strollers. One of them had a label I wrote in black marker, "Mom, sort later." Later never came. I pulled the top box open. Inside were some of my books, a photo album, and the small wooden jewelry box Greg made me when he was in 8th grade. I lifted the lid and found my old watch, some costume earrings, and the tiny silver ring my husband had given me on our 25th anniversary. It was all still there, just like I left it, but no one had cared enough to bring it inside. That night, after dinner, I sat on the futon and stared at the ceiling. I could hear the soft thump of the kids running down the hall above me. Callie and Greg were arguing in hushed voices about something to do with school registration. The noise blended into the hum of the dehumidifier. Leona came downstairs a few minutes later. She was holding a small notebook I'd left on the kitchen counter. "Grandma, can I draw in this?" she asked. "Sure, honey," I said. She sat next to me for a moment, flipping through the pages. Then she looked up and asked, "Do you live here, or are you just stuck?" The question caught me off guard. I tried to smile. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. "You don't have a room, just a couch, and your stuff is in weird places. If a child has ever said something that made your heart sink because it was true, share this story. Someone else might need the courage to make a change too." I didn't answer. I just nodded and handed her a pencil. She went back upstairs after a few minutes, humming a song I didn't recognize. I sat there long after she left, her words hanging in the air like dust in the sun. "Are you just stuck?" That one hit different. It wasn't meant to be cruel. She was just saying what she saw, what everyone else had ignored. I picked up my notebook and flipped past the page I used for grocery lists and reminders to thaw meat. Then I wrote a new title at the top of the page, "What I Still Own." I sat quietly, pen in hand, staring at the blank page. It took me a minute to think of something. My watch, a sewing kit, a worn Bible with a folded church bulletin inside, the old wooden spoon from my first apartment, a framed photo of Greg as a toddler hiding under a blanket fort, my grandmother's quilt, still folded in the back of the futon drawer. That was it. 7 things. I looked around the basement. Not one piece of furniture was mine. Not one painting, not one pillow. The slippers I wore every day had Callie's initials in them, passed down from a gift she didn't want. Even my bath towel was the extra one from their linen closet. I used to have a home, a real one. Now, I had pieces of a life tucked into corners no one looked at. Later that evening, when everyone was asleep, I pulled out the photo album from the garage box and flipped through it. There was one picture of me standing outside the bakery apartment in a red scarf, holding a pie I made from scratch. I was smiling wide, hair blown by the wind, cheeks pink. I looked alive, not tired, not invisible, just a woman standing in her own space. I closed the album gently. I wasn't angry, not yet, but I felt something settle deep in my chest, a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in a long time. It was like a door inside me had opened, not one they gave me, one I built, and I had no idea yet where it would lead, but I knew one thing for sure. It wouldn't be down these stairs, not forever. I hadn't spoken to Jeanette in over a year. It wasn't on purpose. Life just got crowded. I told myself I'd call when things calmed down, but they never did. I'd think about her sometimes, usually while folding laundry or stirring soup, wondering what book she was reading, or if her garden was still overrun with tomatoes like it used to be. But that night, after I looked at that photo of myself smiling in the red scarf, I pulled out my old flip phone and scrolled down to her name. I hesitated. Then I pressed call. She picked up on the second ring. "Well, I'll be damned," she said before I could even say hello. "You still alive over there?" I laughed, but I could feel my throat tighten. "Barely." There was a pause, but not a heavy one. Just her breathing, giving me space. "You sound like someone in a waiting room," she said finally. That made me stop. "What does that mean?" "Like you're not quite in your life. Like you're just sitting there, waiting for someone to call your name." I didn't say anything. Then I told her everything. Not all at once, just in pieces. How I'd given up my apartment thinking it'd be for a few months. How I ended up in a basement with no windows. How my back hurt every day and no one noticed. How I hadn't seen my own belongings in 3 years. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but I didn't. Jeanette didn't interrupt. She didn't say bless their hearts or offer excuses. She just let me talk. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then she said, "Mary, I have a guest room." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "It's not fancy," she said, "but it's got a Rayal bed and a window that opens." I laughed. Not a big laugh, but the kind that sneaks out when you suddenly remember you're still a person. "I'm not trying to run away," I said quietly. "No," she said, "you're trying to come back to yourself." That night, I laid in bed, well, on the futon, and stared at the ceiling like I'd done 100 times. But it felt different now, like something had shifted. The next morning, I moved slowly. My back still ached from the week before, but my mind was clearer than it had been in months. After everyone left the house, Greg to work, Callie to her meeting, the kids off to school, I opened the kitchen drawer where we kept the spare keys. There were 3 on a little hook, one for the front door, one for the garage, one for the mailbox. I took the front door key and slipped it into a small envelope. Then I grabbed my purse, put on a sweater, and walked to the post office 2 blocks away. It was chilly outside, but the sun was out. I walked slow. My back didn't like the incline on Main Street, but I didn't care. I just needed to make it. At the post office, I stood in line behind a young mom with a baby on her hip and a man mailing a stack of packages. I waited quietly, holding my envelope like it was something precious. When I got to the counter, the clerk smiled. "Where to?" I gave her Jeanette's address. "Anything else inside?" she asked. "Just a key," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "I'm sending myself a way out," I added. She smiled again. "Smart woman." I paid in cash. No return address. When I stepped back outside, I felt lighter. Not fixed, not free, but something had changed. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was moving. That night, back in the basement, I started packing in my head. I looked around the room and made a mental list of what I'd take. The photo album, my blue sweater, the old watch, a few books, 1 pot and 1 pan, the sewing kit, and the red kettle if Callie didn't notice it missing. That's all I needed. I didn't need a parade or a speech or some dramatic exit. I just needed to leave quietly, in peace, like slipping out of a coat that didn't fit anymore. The next day, I pulled Jeanette's birthday card from last year out of my purse. On the back, she had scribbled her landline and a note that said, "Just in case you need to talk or scream or both." I smiled. I hadn't screamed, but I had started talking, and that was enough for now. I folded the card and tucked it under my pillow. My pillow, that was something else I'd take with me. I didn't know when I'd go. Maybe a week, maybe 2. But for the first time in a long while, I had a plan that belonged to me. And that small envelope, now making its way toward a quiet street in Idaho with a chipped metal key inside, was proof. I was still here, and I still mattered. I left just after 6 in the morning. The house was still dark. I could hear the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the old pipes groaning in the walls. Everyone was asleep. Even the dog didn't stir. I packed light, a small suitcase with wheels, my folder of documents, and a cloth bag with my tea and the photo album. I folded the blue sweater over the top, the same one I'd found crammed in the hallway closet. I didn't take anything that didn't belong to me. I zipped up the bag and looked around the basement one last time. It was neat. I'd made the futon, wiped the dresser clean, and left the extra blanket folded at the edge like I found it. There was no note, nothing dramatic, just quiet. I walked out the front door, locked it behind me, and slipped the house key under the mat. The sidewalk was cool under my shoes. The air smelled like someone had already started brewing coffee nearby. I stood at the corner and waited for the rideshare driver I'd booked the night before. He pulled up right on time. Young man, polite, helped me with the bag, and didn't ask questions. I didn't cry on the ride to Jeanette's. I just watched the town roll past the window. The grocery store I used to shop at. The church we went to a few times before they got too busy. The bakery I never had time to visit. All the places I had slowly stopped being part of. We drove for almost 2 hours before we reached Jeanette's neighborhood. Her porch light was on even though the sun was up. She was waiting at the front door in a gray robe with a coffee mug in one hand. As soon as I stepped out, she opened her arms. "You made it," she said. "I did." We didn't say much after that. She led me to the guest room, pointed to the dresser and the bathroom down the hall, then left me to settle in. The room was simple, just a full bed, a small window with light yellow curtains, and a wooden chair near the corner. The window faced the backyard. I could see a bird feeder swaying gently in the breeze. I sat on the bed, placed my bag at my feet, and let the silence wrap around me. 3 hours later, Greg called. I saw his name flash on the screen and took a deep breath before answering. "Mom, where are you?" he asked, voice tight. "I'm safe," I said. "Why didn't you say anything? You could have talked to us." I paused. "I did," I said, "for 3 years. You never heard me." If you've ever spoken and felt completely unheard, subscribe right now. This space is for women who've been quiet for too long and are finally ready to be seen. There was a long silence. Then, "We thought you were fine." I said nothing. He let out a sharp breath. "You just left. That's not fair." "I didn't ask for much, Greg," I said softly. "I asked to be seen. I asked to rest. That's all. You know we're under pressure too." "I do," I said. "That's why I didn't make it harder. That's why I left quietly." He didn't respond. I could hear traffic in the background. "Is this permanent?" he finally asked. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I know I can't live in a place where I've disappeared." He started to say something else, but I gently ended the call. A few minutes later, Callie called. I didn't pick up. She called again. Then a text came through. "Real mature, Mary." I didn't reply. I placed the phone face down on the nightstand and turned to the window. A squirrel darted across the fence, then disappeared into a tree. That afternoon, Jeanette made a pot of chicken soup. We sat on the porch and ate quietly. She didn't ask for details, just handed me a second bowl and told me she was glad I came. That night, I slept for 8 straight hours. No dehumidifier humming. No upstairs thuds. No early alarms or sticky floors. Just stillness. My back still hurt, but it wasn't screaming. It was more like it had taken a breath with me. I laid there in the soft light from the hallway and realized something. This was the first time in years I'd fallen asleep without a list in my head. No lunchboxes to prep. No laundry to fold. No whispers in the kitchen. No wondering if someone would ask me to pick up toothpaste or eggs or diapers. Just me, just sleep, and a space that didn't ask me to shrink. It wasn't about being angry anymore. It wasn't even about being sad. It was about remembering that I get to have a life too, a full one. And I was finally starting it again. It took me 2 weeks to find it. A small rental unit in Meridian, not too far from Jeanette's place. Just one room, a small kitchen, and a bathroom tucked into the back. The paint was peeling in spots, and the carpet had a few stains. But the window was wide and clear, and sunlight poured through it like it had been waiting just for me. It faced east. Mornings were bright and warm. I could hear birds outside instead of traffic. The walls didn't shake when someone closed a door. When I toured it, the landlord, a quiet man named Dennis, said, "It's not much, but it's quiet." The last tenant had a cat. I told him I didn't need much, just peace and space that was mine. I signed the lease the next day. It had been a long time since I'd signed anything that didn't involve someone else's name. I looked at my signature afterward, small and a little shaky, but there it was, mine. The next stop was the bank. I opened a new checking account under just my name. I hadn't realized I still had Callie's yoga app on autopay. I canceled it while sitting in the parking lot. The woman at the desk had offered me coffee while we went through paperwork. No one had offered me coffee in over a year. The unit didn't come with much. A bed frame, a table with 2 chairs, and an empty fridge. But I liked that. I picked up a few things from the thrift shop nearby. 1 frying pan, a mug, a plate, a fork and knife, and a red kettle. I saw it sitting on a shelf in the back. It had a chip on the handle, but still whistled when it boiled. I bought it for $3 and smiled the whole walk home. Jeanette helped me move in. She brought a small plant from her porch and a tin of sugar cookies. "You can replace everything else," she said, "but you need a little green and a little sweet to start." The first night in that room, I stood in front of the window for a long time. It was just after sunset. The sky turned soft purple and gold, and the trees cast shadows across the carpet. I boiled water for tea, poured it into the mug, and sat at the table. It was quiet, really quiet. Not the kind where you're listening for something to go wrong, but the kind that lets your shoulders drop. I didn't check my phone. I didn't think about dinner for anyone else. I didn't worry if someone would call my name or ask me to fold a load of laundry at 10 at night. I just sat. In the middle drawer of the kitchen, I placed a small ceramic bowl I'd found at a yard sale. I dropped one thing into it, the spare key from Greg's house. He never noticed it missing. It had been on my keychain for years, sitting there like a weight I never questioned. But now, I wanted it separate, not because I was angry, but because I needed to know the difference between what I left behind and what I carried by choice. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't carry it anymore. That weekend, I signed up for chair yoga at the senior center down the street. Free classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The instructor, Tilda, was in her 70s, but could stretch like someone half her age. She gave me a mat and told me to come early next time for the good spot near the heater. The class wasn't fancy, just 7 women and 1 man, all a little stiff but trying. We laughed more than we moved, but it felt good, like my body belonged to me again. After class, one of the women invited me for coffee at the corner diner. We talked about our backs, grandkids, and where to get good socks in town. No one asked me to babysit. No one handed me a list. They just talked and listened. I started keeping a notebook again, not for reminders, but for small things I noticed. The way the sunlight moved across the wall, the sound the kettle made before it whistled, a line someone said in class that made me laugh. If I fall, I'm blaming gravity, not yoga. Small things, but they were mine. Every now and then, Greg would text, just short messages. "Kids say hi. Hope you're doing okay. One time, sorry if I didn't get it. I think I missed something. I didn't always reply. Sometimes I'd send back a simple, thanks. Other times, nothing. I wasn't being cruel. I was just learning how to answer when I felt ready, not out of guilt, not out of habit. And every time I opened the cabinet for tea, I saw the red kettle. A little chipped, a little old, but still working. Like me. My back still ached some days. But I had space now. I could stretch when I wanted, rest when I needed. I didn't have to explain. I didn't need a big life. I didn't need applause or some grand purpose. I just needed a place with windows. And now I had one. The envelope didn't have a return address, but I knew who it was from the moment I saw the neat typed label and stiff paper. It arrived on a Monday. The mail carrier knocked lightly and handed it over with a smile. I thanked her, closed the door, and stood by the kitchen counter holding it in my hand for a few minutes before opening it. The letter was typed. 1 page. No, Dear Mary, no signature, just a name at the bottom. Callie. She wrote, We had an understanding. The kids miss you. Greg is tired. You left a mess. We hope you'll think about what's best for the family. That was the tone, polite on the surface, but underneath, sharp. I could hear her voice in each line. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't regret. It was control dressed up as concern. There was a part about trust and a line that said, when people make promises, they should follow through. That one made me stop reading. I never promised to carry their world. I folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer next to my phone charger. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been ignored when I said it out loud. I poured myself a cup of tea, opened the window, and went back to my sewing project. I'd started stitching a small quilt out of old fabric scraps I found at the thrift store. Each square came from somewhere else, someone else's life. I liked that. There was something honest about it. 2 weeks went by. I didn't hear from Greg again. I figured they were letting the dust settle, maybe hoping I'd call, apologize, offer to come back just a few days a week. But I had nothing left to offer that way. Then one afternoon, my phone rang. Greg's number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. Hi, Grandma, a small voice said. I smiled without meaning to. Silas. Yeah, I'm using Dad's phone. Is everything okay? I asked. He paused. Can I come over? I was surprised. What for? To play the squirrel game. The memory one. I found it in the toy basket at home. I told Mom I wanted to see you, but she said maybe later. Dad said maybe too, but I really want to. I sat down at the table. The quilt scraps were still spread out. I'd love that, I said gently, but only if your parents say yes, okay? I don't want to cause any trouble. He whispered, I already packed it. That made me laugh. A short, real laugh. You did. Ha! If your grandchild has ever been the one to remind you what love really looks like, go ahead and click that like button. That kind of love deserves to be honored. Yep. And I packed socks and snacks and my book about sea animals. I can bring it all. Can I just come tomorrow? I paused. I'll talk to your dad. Sweetheart. If they say yes, then of course. Okay, he said. Can we have toast with butter? Like before. Absolutely, I said. And hot cocoa if your mom says that's okay too. There was a bit of shuffling on the line, then Greg's voice. Hey, sorry, he got hold of my phone. It's all right, I said. He just misses people. Greg was quiet. He's been asking a lot, he finally said. About you. I miss him too. Another pause. Let me check with Callie and see if we can work something out. Okay, I said. No pressure. Only if it works. We ended the call. That night, I didn't cry. I thought I might, but I didn't. Instead, I cleared a small spot near the table, took out the memory cards with the squirrels, and laid them face down in a neat grid, just in case. The next morning, I got a short text from Greg. Kelly said it's fine. I'll drop him off at 10 and pick him up after lunch. No small talk, no apology, but permission. At 10:03, the doorbell rang. Silas stood there holding a little backpack, eyes wide with excitement. He had the memory game under one arm and a folded sweater in the other. "Can we do cocoa first?" he asked. We did. We sat at the table, the same one where I drink my tea each morning, and we played 3 rounds of the game. He won twice. I let him think I was really trying. He told me about school, his new teacher, and how his little sister ate a crayon last week. He asked if I had a TV, I didn't, and if we could go to the park next time. I said maybe. When Greg came to pick him up, Silas gave me a big hug and whispered, "I like it here." I nodded. Me too. After they left, I sat quietly at the table. The memory cards were still out. I flipped one over and smiled at the squirrel with a nut in its mouth. There was no drama, no raised voices, just a child remembering who saw him. Children notice more than we think. They see love in the way we butter toast or save their favorite games. They feel it in the spaces where they're not rushed or corrected or told to wait. And in that quiet moment, I realized something. I hadn't walked away from love. I had walked toward it with better boundaries. Love doesn't mean staying where you're invisible. Love sometimes means choosing yourself so you can show up whole. Silas started visiting every other weekend. Greg would drop him off around 10 on Saturdays and pick him up by late afternoon. Callie never came along, and she never called. That was fine with me, Silas, and I made pancakes the first morning. He cracked the eggs and got more on the counter than in the bowl, but we laughed through it. Then we built a puzzle at the kitchen table while the kettle whistled behind us. Sometimes we baked cookies. Sometimes we just read books or went to the small park down the street. I brought a cushion for the bench so my back wouldn't act up, and he climbed the monkey bars and shouted, "Watch this," like it was a brand new trick every time. He liked hearing stories about when his dad was his age. One afternoon, I told him about the time Greg tried to make a raft out of milk cartons and rope. It sank in 5 minutes, but he was proud of it anyway. Silas laughed so hard he nearly spilled his cocoa. "Dad did that," he said. "He did." I smiled, and he was sure it would float. After a few visits, Greg started texting in a different tone. No more clipped messages or short check-ins. Just little things. "Did Silas eat lunch okay? Do you still have that banana bread recipe? One day, do you remember the name of that hiking trail we used to go to? I've been thinking about it lately." We weren't having long conversations, but something was shifting. No demands, just curiosity. Like he was remembering I had a life before I was just mom or grandma. I didn't rush to answer every message. I gave myself time. That was new for me, and it felt good. Every morning, I still made tea with the red kettle. I still sat at the table with the notebook I kept tucked under the napkins. Some mornings I'd write full pages. Other times, just one sentence. One entry said, "Day 26. My back still hurts, but no one owns it anymore." That felt true. The ache hadn't gone away, but I wasn't dragging it through someone else's to-do list. I wasn't climbing stairs to fold laundry I didn't wear or packing lunches I didn't eat. I moved at my own pace, and that alone brought relief. My plant on the windowsill had started to bloom, small yellow flowers that looked like they were smiling. I didn't even remember the name of the plant. I picked it up at a church sale for $1, but every time I watered it, I whispered, "Keep going." I think it heard me. At night, I lit a small candle before bed. Not for anyone else. Not because company was coming or to cover up smells from dinner. Just for me. It flickered gently as I brushed my teeth and changed into pajamas. That tiny flame reminded me that quiet can be soft, not lonely. I was no longer waiting for someone to knock on the basement door. I had a front door now, a key that only I used, and mornings that belonged only to me. Some evenings, I would look out the window at the streetlights. Life still moved fast out there. Kids biking home, dogs barking at shadows, cars passing without slowing down. But I didn't feel behind anymore. I wasn't trying to catch up or keep up. I was just here, present. One evening, as Silas was packing up his puzzle pieces, he said, "Grandma, your house is quiet in a good way." That meant everything. He didn't need me to be perfect, just peaceful. And I realized that's what I had become. Not bitter, not broken, just a woman with a morning. To those of you still watching, still listening, thank you. If this story reminded you of something in your own life, I want to ask, when was the last time you said yes because you thought you had to? What part of your life feels like someone else's schedule? And if you could start fresh, even in a small way, what would your version of peace look like? If any of this speaks to you, please like, share, and leave a comment. I read them. They matter. And if you haven't already, subscribe. There are more stories coming. Real ones. Quiet ones. Stories that remind us we're still here and we still matter. Thank you for spending your time with me.